Hello again. Members of Australia's Lebanese community today staged a large demonstration on the lawns of Parliament House in Canberra over foreign intervention in Lebanon. The demonstration follows a deepening of the Lebanese crisis, with American warships unleashing hundreds of rounds of fire against Syrian-backed Lebanese troops in what's been described as the biggest US naval action since the Vietnam War. Vivian Schenker reports from Canberra.
The huge crowd of demonstrators wanted to make one thing very clear. The strife in Lebanon, they said, was not a civil war or a case of Christian and Muslim Lebanese carving each other up. They said the army of a legitimate and democratically elected government was fighting a minority uprising supported by foreign influences.
We don't believe in living under anybody, not Syria, not Palestinians. We want the Lebanese army to control all Lebanon under the present government.
Later in the afternoon, a delegation of Lebanese community leaders met the Prime Minister, Mr. Hawke, to discuss the issue. And it was after that meeting, when the Prime Minister came out to talk to the waiting crowd, that emotions really ran riot. A huge mass of enthusiastic protesters rushed Mr. Hawke, and a large number of federal police and security men struggled to protect him as he told the mob what they wanted to hear.
The capacity of Australia is limited in what we can do, but as I've told your representatives, your ambassador, the representatives of your church, the representatives of your community organisations, I give you the pledge that everything that the Australian government can do will be done to help to bring peace in your country.
A large pro-government demonstration brought the business district of Manila to a standstill tonight as police surged through the streets expressing support for President Marcos. The ABC's reporter on the scene, Bob Worth, says the pro-government demonstrators were quickly overwhelmed by those supporting the opposition movement formed following the assassination of Benigno Aquino. Both factions threw placards at each other, and although there was little violence, pro-government demonstrators were forced to retreat to calls of Marcos resign. Pro-government posters were thrown onto bonfires and yellow ticker tape rained down onto the streets. Police continued to use maximum tolerance as directed by President Marcos. The Liberal and National parties have reached a compromise on how they should approach the government's sex discrimination legislation. A joint meeting of the parties in Canberra today agreed that the opposition will press for 3 amendments to the legislation. Excuse me. If these are rejected, individual members of the opposition will have a free vote, allowing them to vote against the legislation if they so desire. From Canberra, Greg Turnbull.
The compromise was reached at this meeting of the opposition executive yesterday against a background of division between the two parties and within the Liberal Party over how to approach the sex discrimination bill. The Liberal leader, Mr. Peacock, and his spokesman on the status of women, Mr. McPhee, supported the government bill, while the National Party leader, Mr. Anthony, other members of his party and some of their wives were opposed to the bill in its present form. The compromise accepted by the parties today hinges on 3 amendments. They want the partial exemption for non-government schools to be permanent rather than limited to 2 years. They don't want the legislation to rely on the constitutional external affairs power, and they want people charged with discrimination under the Act to have a legal privilege to withhold information on the grounds of self-incrimination. If the government rejects the amendments, the coalition will still support the legislation, but individual members will be free to vote as they please. After the meeting, Mr. McPhee denied suggestions that he'd been forced to back down on the issue.
There is a concern about the use of the external affairs power, and there is a concern about the intervention in the private school system. Our amendments are aimed at correcting those, and I think if the government is prepared to accept especially the latter amendment, then we will have a united position. But I'm sure we're united in terms of principle. It's just a matter of detail.
Detail or not, during question time in Parliament today, the Prime Minister, Mr. Hawke, accused the opposition of being, quote, in absolutely pathetic chaos, unquote, over the sex discrimination bill. In Canberra, Greg Turnbull.
The total cost of building the O-Bahn has jumped 17% in the last year to a new figure of $98 million. The revised estimated cost, up from $84 million the year before, is given in figures provided to State Parliament. The biggest cost increase is in designing, constructing and landscaping, with the O-Bahn guided track being extended from 3 kilometres up to a maximum of 12 kilometres. When the O-Bahn busway was costed after studies into it in May 1981, Its total bill was put at $79 million. Since then, due to inflation, its total cost has now risen by 24%. The coordinator of the Australian delegation to the Third World Wilderness Conference says the Flinders Ranges National Park has become a region of concern to environmentalists. Mr Vern McLaren leaves tomorrow for the Congress, which will be held in Scotland next month. Helen Vatsakopoulos reports.
Mr McLaren and Federal Environment Minister Barry Cohen will discuss the Tasmanian wilderness at the conference, a recent success story which he says highlighted the significance of our own natural region, the Flinders Ranges National Parks. The state government recently approved limited mineral exploration of the area in search of lead and zinc to supply Port Pirie, a move Mr McLaren says is inconsistent with the government's recent land clearing legislation preventing the removal of native vegetation. He says if the government moves towards mining in the region, he could very well find himself discussing the Flinders region at the next Congress. But Mr McLaren says he is confident that public opinion will prevent any mining.
I rather doubt myself that much exploration work will go ahead in the national parks. I would be very sorry, in fact, if it went beyond that point. And I think the eyes of the world would certainly be on it if that happened. But my personal opinion is that it's too valuable an area to allow exploration that would lead to mining in the parks themselves.
The Co-op Building Society today announced that it has joined forces with 6 interstate building societies to form a national association. The chairman of the Co-op, Mr Dick Fidock, said the move would contain some long-term cost-saving benefits to investors and borrowers. There'll be a range of investment services for interstate transactions and assistance with home finance when an investor relocates. Mr Fidock says major savings in technology will be passed on in cost savings to offer rates that are as low as possible on home loans. 16 South Australians received recognition for their contribution to the community today when they were invested with honours and awards in the Order of Australia. Stephen Halliday reports.
This morning's investitures were the third by Governor Sir Donald Dunstan and came from the Queen's Birthday Honours List. The most prestigious award, the Officer of the Order of Australia, was awarded to former State MP and Attorney-General Mr Don Banfield for parliamentary service and for service to the community. Officer of the Order of Australia was also awarded to noted geologist Dr Reginald Sprigg for his service to industry, particularly to petroleum exploration. 4 of those receiving awards were women. Prominent among them was writer and filmmaker Miss Anne Devison, who became a member of the Order of Australia for her service to the media. Among the awards were 2 for bravery. Police Constable Lee Trabilko was awarded the Commendation for Brave Conduct for attempting to save a drowning man in seas near Port Elliston, while Mr Keith Goodchild was awarded the Australian Bravery Medal for saving 2 people from waters near Granite Island at Victor Harbour.
Winds of between 10 and 20 knots are forecast for the America's Cup course off Newport, Rhode Island, for the 4th race between Australia 2 and Liberty. The race is due to start shortly after midnight Australian Eastern Time. The ABC's Jim Middleton reports from Newport that the forecast covers such a wide range that the race could still be sailed in light conditions. He says at present seas off Newport are slight and there could be patches of fog and perhaps some rain. All fairly inconclusive. Let's see what we can do with the local forecast now, shall we? For the state, cool to mild over the settled areas with isolated showers contracting to southern coasts and ranges. Fine and mild to warm in the interiors, southwest to south winds moderating and moderating seas. A strong wind warning is current for south central coast and a gale warning continues for the southeast coast. Broken Hill will be fine with an estimated maximum of 20 degrees. And the estimated maximum temperatures for country centres range, as you can see, from 15 to 20. The metropolitan area forecast cloudy periods with isolated showers at first becoming fine during tomorrow. Southwest winds moderating. Adelaide can expect an overnight low of 9 degrees and a high tomorrow of 17. Well, that's it for tonight. 5 a.m. continuing with up-to-date news throughout the night again. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.